Today we have John Turgeon from Kostin Ruffkess. He will be presenting a webinar on preventing employee fraud through pre-employment practices. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Emily. Pleasure to be part of your webinar series. We're really happy to participate in it, and I'm anxious to deliver the topic today. Let me just start off, if I could. I want to give you a little background on me, not to bore everybody, but just a little bit about what I've been doing in the last 25 years or so, and why this topic is near and dear to me. Originally trained as a CPA, I've spent the last 25 years or so in the area of human capital, and a lot of that has been dealing with issues around attracting people to organizations and dealing with the pre-employment practices that go along with it. So when we get into our topic today and thinking about those practices, I'd like to share with you some things that I've experienced, and now particularly thinking about how we might prevent employee fraud before they actually become employees. There's something, and I've been in this profession for 27 years, but the topic of fraud has stayed with me a very long time, and I'll tell you why. Fraud is something we can take for granted. Sometimes I like to think of it as an illusion. I saw a cartoon almost 25, 26 years ago when it was a story of a gentleman who took a wheelbarrow as he was leaving work every day filled with sand, and he was walking out to his car. And he'd get to the gate at the end of the road, and the security guard would sit in there and look at the wheelbarrow and wondered if something was wrong. He'd stick a stick in the sand and stir it around in the wheelbarrow and realized there was nothing in there. This was probably safe to let the gentleman go. And he did. And every day for a whole week, that gentleman would wheel a wheelbarrow to the end of the security line, have a stick jammed in it, and realize nothing was there by the security guard, and he'd go home each and every day. Finally, at the change of security guards, somebody asked the question, geez, don't you suspect anything? Isn't anything wrong with that? And the person said, no, I check every single day. There's nothing in that sand. Now, the short story is he wasn't stealing anything in the sand. He was actually stealing wheelbarrows. And the reason I bring up that story is because it has stayed with me so very long. Fraud, as I like to look at it, is oftentimes it's an illusion. You know, people who perpetrate fraud are making you think one thing when they're actually doing something else. And that cartoon has resonated with me for a very long period of time. So when we go through this, and we go through this process right now of thinking about how to prevent some of that happening as people come into the organization, let's just keep that story in mind. I'd like to start with some basic facts, though, when you think about the employment practices. Applicants lie. We have to accept that. We have to understand it, that applicants lie. And the reason that they do that is there's really no penalty for getting caught. If you think about it, we've all interviewed people over the years. We've all looked at them as potential candidates for our business, and we've found people who have lied. And the worst thing that's happened to them is we've said, you can't have the job. We're not going to hire you. You're not qualified. Whatever the reason was that we've given to them. But there's really been no penalty. Nobody goes to jail. Nobody gets arrested. There's really no true penalty for them lying. So applicants will lie over and over and over again, at least those that are deceitful. And something that you have to recognize is because they will do that and there is no penalty, they'll probably do it until they get caught, and you have to be mindful of it. Now, there was a survey done by Career Builder back in 2008, and it just shared some information about where applicants lie. Now, this isn't an all-inclusive list by any stretch, but it's some of the places where they see it happening on a more regular basis. And it's important to point those things out because it will help you understand how you may catch candidates who really aren't presenting exactly from an employment fraud perspective what the real responsibilities are, their skill sets were, but also if they were likely to lie there or misrepresent themselves there, they might be trouble a little bit later on. So you see here things like job responsibilities. People have almost 40% of the time, applicants can lie about their job responsibilities. And that's going beyond just stretching a skill set or just embellishing a little bit. We're really talking about I've done something, telling people I've done something that I've never really done at all. Same thing with skill sets, dates of employment. That's really one of the common fraud, I'll say perpetrated frauds in the employment practice, where people will try to make dates look like they're one right after another, when in reality there's gaps and there's real reasons for those gaps. Academic degrees, I've run into that situation a number of times with people indicating that they've had some certain education that they never really did, and then places where they've worked. It's funny, there's a story, and I can't remember if it was a place like IBM or Microsoft, but it was a very large business that somebody had said that they worked for, and the person who they were interviewing with had just left that business, and clearly it was no match, no background, and the candidate just continued to lie in that setting. It's just a shame that it happens, but those are places where people will misrepresent themselves. So how do you get past that? If we know applicants are going to lie in the practice or in the practice of going through interviewing, how do we kind of catch that? How do we uncover the misrepresentations? And there's really a few things that I think are really important for organizations to be thinking about. The one, and it really starts up at the top, it's what I call the well-articulated recruiting and hiring process. And really what we're looking for there is that you want to make sure that your practice isn't a seat of the pants sort of practice. No matter how big or how small the business is, and sometimes this is where it gets very casual. The smaller the size of the organization, or the more warm or friendly the culture is, people don't like to get into a very formal recruiting and hiring process. But it's real important that you have it well articulated, and we'll cover what that means in a little bit. But that's where you can stop things, stop people from entering your business who really don't belong there. And this is really huge, a strong, well-defined practice in that area. Treating candidates or applicants consistently in the process is another way in which you will uncover the misrepresentations. I'm going to give you two examples just on that point alone. Some people who may be college football fans might remember the name George O'Leary. George was a very successful football coach at Georgia Tech, had a great record, had done wonderful things with Georgia Tech's football program. Several years back, the University of Notre Dame was in search of a football coach and went out and hired George O'Leary. Great press release. There was fanfare. It was wonderful. Everybody was excited about it at the University of Notre Dame. They really treasure their football team. Nobody in the athletic office apparently had done a background investigation on George O'Leary. Why would they? He's a successful coach, well recognized, great record. Well, what ended up happening is the media decided that we needed to dig in a little bit more. Who is George? What has he done? And it was through the media's efforts that they found out that many, many years ago, when George O'Leary was first entering the field of coaching, he misrepresented some education that he had on his in his background, and never either got the degree or held a particular position. I believe it was education, but he never had it. He misrepresented it way back in his early years to get the job, one of his initial jobs, and then it just perpetuated all the way through. He never took it off of his record. What ended up happening there, because Notre Dame didn't treat applicants consistently, at least as it's all been reported in the papers, they had a lot of egg on their face. They now had a coach who didn't stand for what the University of Notre Dame was pointing out, and so George quickly and abruptly had to resign. In my organization, I've been here now for about 4 years. I'm a human capital strategist with Kostin, Ruffkess and Company. I had known a number of the leaders here at our firm, and when I was coming here, they said, oh, geez, you know what, we don't need to do a background investigation on you. We've known you. We understand you. We respect you. I thought that was wonderful, but knowing I was going to be leading the human capital initiative here, I said, listen, we need a background investigation done on me, because I'm going to ask that we have one done on everybody else as well. Treating applicants consistently is real important. You never want to let anything interfere with that. And then the last piece about helping to uncover the misrepresentations really comes into what are your practices, knowing how you'll handle certain situations in advance once you've gained certain facts or you've gained certain information through the recruiting process. So for instance, if you get some bad information on an application, what are you going to do with it? When you find that there are gaps in a person's employment, how will you handle it? The reason why it's important to do all of that and know in advance, it's like the if-then situations in computer programming, is it'll allow you to be more judicious in terms of how you will approach things, more fair in terms of how you will be treating candidates, and you'll obviously be able to get, on a more expeditious manner, you'll be able to get the answers to the questions that you need. So it's very, very important to be able to do those things. So when we think about that, today, we'll just focus on really two then large areas. We'll call them the data collection and the candidate interview process, and then we'll talk about background investigations. These will be the places where we'll learn as much as we can about the candidates to be able to make some decisions as to whether or not we want them in our business. Under the data collection process, this is where I go back to that well-articulated interviewing practice. It starts with an employment application and then a complete employment application. I really don't know how many businesses out there don't have them, but I've seen over my years a number of organizations who had adopted somebody else's employment application, had a few lines of an employment application. This is, if you think about it, this is really one of the very first places where you're asking people to honestly convey information to you in a factual way about what they've done, where they've done it, how long they've done it, wage information, whether or not they've been convicted of serious crimes, all those sorts of things. This is a place where you can get it and get it in a very efficient manner through a complete employment application. Standardizing that and getting that there and letting candidates know that you're going to check up on that application once you do receive it is very important. It will weed people out of the process. Every time you ask somebody to do something that they might have to lie or misrepresent something, you'll weed some people out. Those who don't have to worry about that will probably try to find another way to get in the door, but if you make this part of your practice, I think you can weed out some of the bad apples. The next step, what I call the whole candidate interview process, this is really one where if you're not prepared, trained, and educated to do a thoughtful interview, this is where you can really hurt the organization. On the flip side, a well-articulated process here is something that can also save the organization. And let me give you a couple of examples what I mean by that. My experience over the years has been that people oftentimes like to interview based upon their gut. They will say, you know, I'll know a good person when I see it. I'll trust my instincts. I'll feel comfortable that we've got a good working relationship. I like to judge their personalities. Those are some of the answers that you get when you ask people how they interview candidates. Well, some of that is true, and you do want to trust your instincts a little bit. A real strong candidate interviewing practice is something where it's fact-based. It's job-related, it's job-focused, and it's fact-based. When you think about it, doing it that way, you are much better going to find, much better be able to match candidates up with the opportunities that you have. So the first thing that you want to be able to do is really uncover what it is that you're looking for. So what are the job requirements as you're looking for your candidates? You'll see here you want to be focusing on their past performances. What is it that they've done in the past that will allow you to have comfort that they'll be able to do that in the future? You want to be actively listening in this interviewing process and listening to the stories, the explanations that they're giving you. You really want to be able to, with a critical eye, be thinking about trying to uncover where there may be inconsistencies, gaps in employment, incomplete information. And not be afraid in this interviewing stage about professionally challenging the candidate during the discussion. And what I mean by that is we all like to be nice people. We all like to, especially when we're sitting across from somebody that might be part of our organization in the future, we want to be comfortable. We want them to like us. Well, liking people but liking bad people wouldn't be good, or liking somebody that won't be a fit for your organization won't be good. Challenge them seriously in the interviewing process about what you heard, about the completeness of what they've done, about how they've delivered on that, about their past performances, and you will make the candidate feel better about ultimately earning the job, but you'll also make better decisions as to whether or not they really truly are the right person for your organization. I want to pause here for a second because it's not as simple as I've just described. To actually be good at interviewing people takes a lot of time and a lot of practice. One of the things that organizations often put off in doing is to actually train their people in effective manners about how to go about in doing what we might call behavioral-based interviewing. It is an uncomfortable experience, but if it's done properly, people will learn how to dig after those past experiences, be able to dig after the things that are meaningful to the organization, make sure they hear everything that they need to hear about those roles and responsibilities, and then be able to make a proper assessment. I can tell you for sure in this stage of the process right here with the data collection and the candidate interview, you will weed out people who do misrepresent what we've heard on that Career Builder survey. You will be able to weed out individuals who really never performed the job responsibilities or never really developed the skill sets, because when you challenge them this way, they won't be able to articulate that answer back to you in a way that will give you the comfort that they've actually done it. This is a really challenging part of the process, and it's something that we counsel our clients on here at Kostin, Ruffkess and Company. Another part is the background investigations, and this is, interestingly enough, another area that I think people and businesses can fall down on. Number one, a lot of people, because there's a cost associated with doing background investigations, don't do them. It can be anywhere from, let's just say, $100 to $200 or $300 to do some investigations, at least the ones that you would likely want to conduct on people. And if people are frugal, they'll say, well, geez, I'd rather not spend that money. I think I'll rely on the interview, or I think I'll rely on a reference. My advice is don't do that. Be focused on that $100, $200, $300 cost, whatever it might be, as a real investment in making sure you've got the right people in your business. Today, out on the internet, you can see, all of us, I think, can probably try to request background investigations on people we run into and meet. I would stay away from all of that. You want to go after and talk to professional organizations that conduct these background investigations for a living, because this is a very sensitive area, a very complicated area, and you want to make sure that you're getting good information when you go through the investigations. It's also one of those places where you don't want to be fooled. It is very easy to get comfort in something that you really shouldn't have comfort in, and here's what I mean by that. Background investigations, if we were to go through one for an organization and we got back and we said that everything looked clean, it's almost a false sense of security unless we really know what was looked at, what records were assessed. If you think about this, background investigations, when we look at Social Security number traces, criminal records, civil court records, all those sorts of things, they're done on a county-by-county basis. And it's usually based upon where a candidate has resided over the past 10 years or so. There are 3,000 counties in the United States. So as you can imagine, any background investigation service that you might be engaging, at least for the purposes of how we would all be using it, is never going to be able to search those 3,000 counties. What they are going to be able to do is do it on a pinpointed basis, where the candidate has resided in the 10 years. They might not even do it where the candidates always worked during those past 10 years, unless you define it as something that you want. But assuming we're covering the proper territory and we're doing it the right way, we will get some comfort about a candidate's criminal records, if should they have any civil court records, should they have anything that might talk about sexual predator or those sorts of things that might show up in a particular database that's out there. We would be able to take a look at their driving record. Some of that would be very important, especially if a person's going to be driving a vehicle for our work role that we've given them. Credit reports and bankruptcy records, those are important, but they're largely important in today's world only in situations where the person's going to be in a situation of managing money and having that kind of responsibility. If they're not, if you have a forklift operator and they're behind on their bills, it's usually not a reason why you would deny that person employment, especially where the economy has been the last few years. But that credit report and bankruptcy record would be something that would be more important in situations where you've got somebody who may be a financial manager, a stockbroker, or something along those lines, where if they can't manage their own money, how would you expect them to manage somebody else's? And then things like educational and professional licenses, those are all good things that you want to be able to check as you go back. As I mentioned a minute ago, somebody didn't do some of this with that hiring of George O'Leary at the University of Notre Dame. Had they done some of that and gone back and checked educational backgrounds and the like, they might have found that there was some problems. a common question that I get around this as we start to wrap up some of these practices that you'll want to think about, but a common question that I get is what is it like, or how do I approach it if I want to go back and go to a person's previous employer and try to get some professional references from them? What should I expect? Can I do this? Am I going to get any information? Unfortunately, in the world that we live in today, most employers will have established practices that said, we're not going to give out any information. We'll confirm that the person was an employee here. We'll confirm dates of employment. We will even confirm title and sometimes wage information, provided we're given a release that the candidate has signed off and authorized us to do that. Beyond that, you will generally not get any other information from the employer. The bigger the employer, you'll find that most of them have made it even more convenient to say no by having automated systems in place to provide that information when you reach out. So it is very difficult, unfortunately, it is very difficult to get a lot more of the professional reference information that you would like to have from a business, but if you can confirm dates of employment, title, wages, it will provide you with at least a little bit of comfort. Sometimes most of us might try to work around that and try to get to coworkers or try to get to others in the organization, but if the education's been doing what it should, it probably has communicated its practices to everybody within that business, and is likely told people that to divert all those requests back to human resources or back to another area, and then you'll get your no answer. So let me just stop here. Those are two very good ways to try to prevent employee fraud by preventing having the wrong people come into the organization to begin with. I don't want to profile people, but sometimes people who lie or misrepresent things will do other bad things once they come aboard. If you go back and think about, can I build an effective employment practice of having a strong application, having a strong, well-articulated interviewing practice, maybe get my people trained in that practice. We've done programs over the years where we've trained workforces where it's really about training them to conduct the interview, learn how to do it properly, probe properly, know how to ask the right kinds of past behavior directed questions, do that so you get some real meaningful information, and then when you get to the point where you feel like you have strong candidates for consideration, having a more complete background investigation like I've described here, using professional assistance, the right kinds of organizations, I think will really help you screen that out. So for today, that's what I wanted to share with you in terms of some of the pre-employment practices. If people have questions after today, after listening to the webinar, that they would like to learn a little bit more about or follow up with me on, I'd be happy to address those. I've got my contact information up here. There's my email, and I'd be happy to talk to you about the background investigation process or the interviewing practice that you might want to consider as well. We also have another gentleman who works with us here at Kostin, Ruffkess and Company. His name is Joe Senafani, and Joe is also a great resource to businesses around fraud prevention and investigation. So if there is suspicion of fraud in an organization, or you're looking at ways and saying, listen, I'm not sure there is, but I'd like to make sure that with my current workforce I've got the right kind of practices in place, Joe would be an excellent person to talk to about how best to structure some of those practices. Emily, I hope that was helpful to you in terms of responding to some of the pre-employment practices. And if you had some questions for me, I'd be happy to try to address those.
Thank you, John. Yeah, that was wonderful. And I do have a few questions that I'd like to go through. The first, we were thinking about there's quite a range of substances that can be addictive. And what kind of testing do you think an employer should ask for that is both the most comprehensive and the most cost-effective?
Sure. Well, in my spirit of not misrepresenting anything, I will tell you I'm not an expert on drug testing, but I will share you this, that there are companies that ask that question all along: should we test our workforce or shouldn't we? I think the first thing that you want to establish is what's the reasons why we would want to have a drug testing program as part of our hiring practice. And one of the things that I would think about is that if you have people that are regularly using heavy equipment and machinery and so forth, if abuse were to happen and be brought into the organization, that could be catastrophic for those individuals and people that are associated around them. So that might be, you have to define the reasons for it. Beyond that, if you decide that there is a business reason for having some sort of a drug testing program out there, recognizing that the PPC members are around the country, the best thing I would suggest is to take a look at individual state laws, because there are many different state laws around what you can test for, how you can test for it, who has access to that information, especially under today's privacy rules. And from there, I think you'll get a little bit more information about the best way to go about doing it.
Okay, great. And you mentioned this in your presentation, that many employers will only provide verification of employment, no description of duties and responsibilities. So it can be pretty difficult to ascertain whether duties or responsibilities have been inflated on a resume.
That's correct.
In an interview. So do you think that it would be helpful to get a signed release from the prospective employee that could be faxed ahead of time to his or her references?
You know, the answer is yes. You can certainly try that. So in other words, you can't conduct background investigations without a signed release, and usually employers won't give you any information unless there's a signed release. So if you look at those employment applications and you think about that, the employment application often is a signed authorization that would allow you to conduct that reference request with an employer. But I want to go on record as saying I still think most employers will be reluctant to give you information. I think what they want to say is whether it was good or bad. You could have a terrific employee and they won't say anything, and you could have a not so terrific employee and they won't say anything. That's why I want to go back, Emily, to how do you get around that, and that's really in the interviewing practices. If you and I were to sit down and I were to talk to you in a way in which I could ask you very specific past behavior-driven questions, if you are not skilled or you have not actually performed those duties, those responsibilities, and if you haven't performed them at the level that is satisfactory to me, it will come out in the discussion, believe it or not. Because if you've done wonderful things, if you've had great accomplishments, and I've asked the right questions in the right format, much of that will actually come out in the dialogue. It's very hard to lie and misrepresent that in a very strong behavioral-based interviewing practice. So that's one way in which you can go around it, even if you won't get the information from the employer.
Okay, great. So do you have any ideas that you would suggest for implementing an anonymous reporting system concerning fraud or theft?
You know, and this is really where Joe's area of expertise comes into play. And I know from speaking with him and working with Joe over the years that the answer to the question is an anonymous system is a great way to help an organization identify if fraud is occurring out there. It's actually the #1 way, because fraud is oftentimes uncovered through employee tips or tips within the organization. He had shared with me that over 2/3 of employees will not go to a manager. Statistics show they will not go to the manager. They will not go to an identified person, oftentimes even within the organization. They want to go someplace where they truly believe it will be anonymous. So, for instance, an outside hotline is a very good place to go. It's a service we offer to our clients today, and it's a place where they can go and talk to somebody who's educated and uncovering some information through those tips to make sure they understand the facts and circumstances, and then it allows the organization to get that anonymous tip to be able to understand what they should do with it, how they should act on it, and then may also engage others like us or other certified individuals who might be able to help weave your way through understanding whether fraud really did occur, and if so, what has occurred. So an anonymous hotline is absolutely a great way to go about doing it. It makes people feel comfortable. If you take it away from the organization itself, and since most tips come in that way, we would certainly recommend that people think about using that kind of an approach.
Okay, great. This next question is two parts. Can you describe how an employer would go about establishing a zero-tolerance policy regarding theft and fraud before an incident occurs and as a company-wide practice? And what would be important to know in establishing written policies?
Yeah, we'll break it down into a couple of very simple things, but they come down to policy, meaning in order to establish this, you really do want to make sure that people are aware that it is important to the organization. So let's just take this away from fraud for a second, but on a similar topic. If we promote ethics in the organization and we talk about ethics in the organization on a regular basis, then what happens is ethics and a strong ethical workforce is what you create, because people are constantly thinking about that. The same thing would be true here. A good employment practice, or good zero-tolerance practice, I should say, around fraud is to state separately that you do have a fraud policy, that it is zero tolerance, that you will investigate on these particular matters, and that you will have, whether it could be a hotline, an anonymous hotline to accept those tips, or individuals that you would like people to go to report that information. That's really the best way to go about doing it. It's similar to what organizations do around harassment or sexual harassment policies. They're not embedded, Emily, in something else. They sit there and they are separate and distinct policies that cover a number of things like who's responsible, where do I go for information, where do I go for assistance, who can I talk to, how can I report a tip, what's likely to happen when I report that tip. In other words, oftentimes that means that there might be a prompt investigation on behalf of the company to make sure they've got the facts. They don't promise necessarily any particular course of action, but they'll at least promise that there will be an investigation to follow up on it. If you do all those things, I think what will happen, and you act on those in a consistent fashion, much like we did in the employment practice as part of this discussion, and you act on things in a consistent fashion, then people will see that not only do you have a strong policy, but you also have a zero-tolerance one, where you might be excusing people every time that you found and confirmed that there really truly was fraud in your organization.
Okay, thank you. So just one last question.
Sure.
What do you think are the most common types of thefts, and are there early warning signs that employers should be aware of, or red flags that should alert employers to theft?
There are, and these are cited public statistics that are out there, but the common types of fraud or theft that will actually occur, and let's just use the manufacturing environment for example, are what I'll call general corruption. So just general corruption within an organization, billing fraud, a lot of non-cash related fraud that could be including taking things out of the business, taking materials or taking product, or whether it's raw materials or tools, and so that could be coming out of it. A lot of fraud also will happen in the area of expense reimbursement, so that's where people will try to extract benefit that they think they're entitled to out of the organization. There are oftentimes red flags that will come up, and remember I said people will try to do this in a way. When I gave that wheelbarrow story, they'll try to make you think one thing when they're actually doing something else. So in the billing situation where there may be improper billing, what they're trying to do is they're thinking billing is going and being performed to a valid vendor, and that vendor should be paid from that vendor, I should say, and then payments being made to that valid vendor when it really isn't. It creates the illusion that that's a real vendor that we owe money to, and the fact of the matter is we don't. So you have to think of fraud that way. Some of the red flags that will pop up, of course, are where, without trying to profile people again, but if you know people, or you understand people may be living beyond their means. They may be driving vehicles they might not normally have, or they might be living in houses that probably are too big for their wage base, and they're really stretching. So that puts people in some awkward situations that on a behavioral basis may force them into, on a desperation sort of an approach into this kind of fraud where it's the only way they can dig themselves out. So you might see things where people are living beyond their means, they have financial difficulties, they're unwilling to share duties and responsibilities, they need to have control over the situation. Those are some of the initial red flags, behavioral red flags that you might see. On the other side of the coin, you might see people too now, and this goes back to where not only are they living beyond their means, but all of a sudden somebody who was never in a awkward situation is driving around some flashy new car, taking extravagant vacations, doing some things with a new house, or buying lots of gifts and so forth, and you're saying to yourself, geez, I don't want to profile people, but that just seems to be unusual. Your antenna should go up and wondering, is there some sort of an activity that along with this person maybe never taking vacation, not relinquishing any duties or responsibilities to other people, maybe bank accounts that they're responsible for aren't being reconciled on a regular basis. From an accounting perspective, subsidiary ledgers within an organization, they're not being reconciled on a regular basis. Those all together might be indications that there are fraud. Those are truly going to be warning signs that somebody may have done something inappropriate, and then you want to call in the experts to help you figure out, well, what's really taking place, is there really fraud, and then how do we uncover what that fraud has amounted to, and how we might recover it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, John. This was really informative and enjoyable. So if any of our listeners have any questions about this, you can contact me, Emily Ray. My phone number is 413-686-9185, or you could email me at emily@ppcnet.org. All right, John, take care.
Yes, thank you, Emily. We appreciate it, and look forward to helping with you in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.